Take up any one of our ordinary newspapers, and you will find a part devoted to the theater and music. In almost every number, you will find a description of some art exhibition or of some particular picture, and you will always find reviews of new works of art that have appeared, or of volumes of poems, of short stories, or of novels. Promptly and in detail, as soon as it has occurred, an account is published of how such and such an actress or actor played this or that role in such and such a drama, comedy, or opera, and of the merits of the performance, as well as of the contents of the new drama, comedy, or opera, with its defects and merits. With as much care and detail, or even more, we are told how such and such an artist has sung a certain piece or has played it on the piano or violin, and what were the merits and defects of the piece and of the performance. In every large town there is sure to be at least one, if not more than one, exhibition of new pictures, the merits and defects of which are discussed in the utmost detail by critics and connoisseurs. New novels and poems in separate volumes or in the magazines appear almost every day, and the newspapers consider it their duty to give their readers detailed accounts of these artistic productions. For the support of art in Russia, where for the education of the people only 100th part is spent of what would be required to give everyone the opportunity of instruction. The government grants millions of rubles in subsidies to academies, conservatories, and theaters. In France, 20 million francs are assigned for art, and similar grants are made in Germany and England. In every large town, enormous buildings are erected for museums, academies, conservatories, dramatic schools, and for performances and concerts. Hundreds of thousands of workmen, carpenters, masons, painters, joiners, paper hangers, tailors, hairdressers, jewelers, molders, typesetters, spend their whole lives in hard labor to satisfy the demands of art, so that hardly any other department of human activity except the military consumes so much energy as this. Not only is enormous labor spent on this activity, but in it, as in war, the very lives of men are sacrificed. Hundreds of thousands of people devote their lives from childhood to learning to twirl their legs rapidly, dancers, or to touch notes and strings very rapidly, musicians, or to draw with paint and represent what they see, artists, or to turn every phrase inside out and find a rhyme to every word. And these people, often very kind and clever and capable of all sorts of useful labor, grow savage over their specialized and stupefying occupations, and become one-sided and self-complacent specialists, dull to all the serious phenomena of life, and skillful only at rapidly twisting their legs, their tongues, or their fingers. But even this stunting of human life is not the worst. I remember being once at the rehearsal of one of the most ordinary of the new operas which are produced at all the opera houses of Europe and America. I arrived when the first act had already begun. To reach the auditorium, I had to pass through the stage entrance. By dark entrances and passages, I was led through the vaults of an enormous building, past immense machines for changing the scenery and for lighting, and there in the gloom and dust I saw workmen busily engaged. One of these men, pale, haggard, in a dirty blouse, with dirty, work-worn hands and cramped fingers, evidently tired and out of humor, went past me, angrily scolding another man. ascending by a dark stair that came out on the boards behind the scenes. Amid various poles and rings and scattered scenery, decorations, and curtains stood and moved dozens, if not hundreds, of painted and dressed up men in costumes fitting tight to their thighs and calves, and also women, as usual, as nearly nude as might be. These were all singers or members of the chorus or ballet dancers waiting their turns. My guide led me across the stage and by means of a bridge of boards across the orchestra, in which perhaps 100 musicians of all kinds, from kettle drum to flute and harp, were seated, into the dark pit stalls on an elevation between two lamps with reflectors, and in an armchair placed before a music stand sat the director of the musical part, baton in hand, managing the orchestra and singers, and, in general, the production of the whole opera. The performance had already begun, and on the stage a procession of Indians who had brought home a bride was being presented. Besides men and women in costume, two other men in ordinary clothes bustled and ran about on the stage. One was the director of the dramatic part, and the other, who stepped about in soft shoes and ran from place to place with unusual agility, was the dancing master, whose salary per month exceeded what 10 laborers earn in a year. These three directors arranged the singing, the orchestra, and the procession. The procession, as usual, was enacted by couples with tinfoil halberds on their shoulders. They all came from one place and walked round and round again, and then stopped. The procession took a long time to arrange. First, the Indians with halberds came on too late, then too soon, then at the right time, but crowded together at the exit. Then they did not crowd, but arranged themselves badly at the sides of the stage, and each time the whole performance was stopped and started again from the beginning. The procession was introduced by a recitative delivered by a man dressed up like some variety of Turk, who, opening his mouth in a curious way, sang, "Home I bring the bride." He sings and waves his arms, which is of course bare, from under his mantle. The procession begins, but here the French horn, in the accompaniment of the recitative, does something wrong, and the director, with a shudder as if some catastrophe had occurred, raps with his stick on the stand. All is stopped, and the director, turning to the orchestra, attacks the French horn, scolding him in the rudest terms, as cabmen abuse each other for taking the wrong note. And again, the whole thing begins again. The Indians with their halberds again come on, treading softly in their extraordinary boots. Again the singer sings, "Home I bring the bride." But here the pairs get too close together, more raps with the stick, more scolding, and a recommencement. Again, "Home I bring the bride." Again, the same gesticulation with the bare arm from under the mantle, and again the couples, treading softly with halberds on their shoulders, some with sad and serious faces, some talking and smiling, arrange themselves in a circle and begin to sing. All seems to be going well, but again the stick raps, and the director, in distressed and angry voice, begins to scold the men and women of the chorus. It appears that, when singing, they had omitted to raise their hands from time to time in sign of animation. "You are all dead, or what? Cows that you are! Are you corpses, that you can't move?" Again they start, "Home I bring the bride," and again, with sorrowful faces, the chorus of women sing, first one and then another of them raising their hands, but two chorus girls speak to each other, again a more vehement rapping with the stick, Have you come here to talk? Can't you gossip at home? You there in red breeches, come nearer. Look toward me. Begin. Again. Again. Home I bring the bride. And so it goes on for 1, 2, 3 hours. The whole of such a rehearsal lasts 6 hours on end. Raps with the stick, repetitions, placings, corrections of the singers, of the orchestra, of the procession, of the dancers, all seasoned with angry scolding. I heard the words asses, fools, idiots, swine addressed to the musicians and singers at least 40 times in the course of 1 hour, and the unhappy individual to whom the abuse is addressed, flutist, hornblower, or singer, physically and mentally demoralized, does not reply and does what is demanded of him. 20 times is repeated the one phrase, home I bring the bride, and 20 times the striding about in yellow shoes with a halberd over the shoulder. The conductor knows that these people are so demoralized that they are no longer fit for anything but to blow trumpets and walk about with halberds and in yellow shoes, and that they are also accustomed to dainty, easy living, so that they will put up with anything rather than lose their luxurious life. He therefore gives free vent to his churlishness, especially as he had seen the same thing done in Paris and Vienna, and knows that this is the way the best conductors behave, and that it is the musical tradition of great artists to be so carried away by the great business of their art that they cannot pause to consider the feelings of other artists. It would be difficult to find a more repulsive sight. I have seen one workman abuse another for not supporting the weight piled upon him when goods were being unloaded, or at hay stacking. The village elder scolded a peasant for not making the rick right, and the man submitted in silence. And however unpleasant it was to witness the scene, the unpleasantness was lessened by the consciousness that the business in hand was needful and important, and that the fault for which the headman scolded the laborer was one which might spoil a needful undertaking. But what was being done here? For what? And for whom? Very likely the conductor was tired out, like the workman I passed in the vault. It was evident that he was, but who made him tire himself? And for what was he tiring himself? The opera he was rehearsing was one of the most ordinary of operas for people who are accustomed to them, but also one of the most gigantic absurdities that could possibly be devised. An Indian king wants to marry, they bring him a bride, he disguises himself as a minstrel, the bride falls in love with the minstrel and is in despair, but afterwards discovers that the minstrel is a king, and everyone is highly delighted that there never were or could be such Indians, and that they were not only unlike Indians, but that what they were doing was unlike anything on earth except other operas, was beyond all manner of doubt. That people do not converse in such a way as recitative, and do not place themselves at fixed distances in a quartet, waving their arms to express their emotions, that nowhere except in theaters do people walk about in such a manner, in pairs, with tinfoil halberds and slippers, that no one ever gets angry in such a way, or is affected in such a way, or laughs in such a way, or cries in such a way, and that no one on earth can be moved by such performances. All this is beyond the possibility of doubt. Instinctively, the question presents itself, for whom is this being done? Whom can it please? If there are occasionally good melodies in the opera to which it is pleasant to listen, they could have been sung simply, without these stupid costumes and all the processions and recitatives and hand wavings. The ballet, in which half naked women make voluptuous movements, twisting themselves into various sensual breathings, is simply a lewd performance. So one is quite at a loss as to whom these things are done for. The man of culture is heartily sick of them, while to a real working man they are utterly incomprehensible. If anyone can be pleased by these things, which is doubtful, it can only be some young footman or depraved artisan who has contracted the spirit of the upper classes, but is not yet satiated with their amusement and wishes to show his breeding. And all this nasty folly is prepared not simply nor with kindly merriment, but with anger and brutal cruelty. It is said that it is all done for the sake of art, and that art is a very important thing. But is it true that art is so important that such sacrifices should be made for its sake? This question is especially urgent because art, for the sake of which the labor of millions, the lives of men, and above all, love between man and man, are being sacrificed. This very art is becoming something more and more vague and uncertain to human perception. Criticism, in which the lovers of art used to find support for their opinions, has latterly become so self contradictory that if we exclude from the domain of art all that to which the critics of various schools themselves deny the title, there is scarcely any art left. The artists of various sects, like the theologians of the various sects, mutually exclude and destroy themselves. Listen to the artists of the schools of our times, and you will find in all branches each set of artists disowning others. In all branches, each set of artists disowning others. In poetry, the old romanticists deny the Parnassians and the decadents, and the Parnassians disown the romanticists and the decadents. The decadents disown all their predecessors, and the symbolists disown all their predecessors, and the les mages disown all their predecessors. Among novelists, we have naturalists, psychologists, and naturists, all rejecting each other. And it is the same in dramatic art, in painting, and in music. So art, which demands such tremendous labor sacrifices from the people, which stunts human lives and transgresses against human love, it is not only not a thing clearly and firmly defined, but it understood in such contradictory ways by its own devotees that it is difficult to say what is meant by art, and especially what is good, useful art for the sake of which we might condone such sacrifices as are being offered at its shrine. For the production of every ballet, circus, opera, operetta, exhibition, picture, concert, or printed book, the intense and unwilling labor of thousands of people is needed at what is often harmful and humiliating work. It were well if artists made all they require for themselves, but as it is, they all need the help of workmen, not only to produce art, but also for their own, usually luxurious, maintenance. And one way or other, they get it, either through payments from rich people or through subsidies given by government in Russia, for instance, in grants of millions of rubles to theaters, conservatories, and academies. This money is collected from the people, some of whom have to sell their only cow to pay the tax, and who never get those aesthetic pleasures which art gives. It was all very well for a Greek or Roman artist, or even for a Russian artist of the first half of our century, when there were still slaves and it was considered right that there should be, with a quiet mind, to make people serve him and his art. But in our day, when in all men there is at least some dim perception of the equal rights of all, it is impossible to constrain people to labor unwillingly for art without first deciding the question whether it is true that art is so good and so important an affair as to redeem this evil. If not, we have the terrible probability to consider that while fearful sacrifices of the labor and lives of men and of morality itself are being made to art, that same art may be not only useless but even harmful, and therefore it is necessary for a society in which works of art arise and are supported to find out whether all that professes to be art is really art, whether, as is presupposed in our society, all that which is art is good, and whether it is important and worth those sacrifices which it necessitates. It is still more necessary for every conscientious artist to know this, that he may be sure that all he does has a valid meaning, that it is not merely an infatuation of the small circle of people among whom he lives, which excites in him the false assurance that he is doing a good work, and that what he takes from others for the support of his often very luxurious life will be compensated for by those productions at which he works. And that is why answers to the above questions are especially important in our time. What is this art which is considered so important and necessary for humanity that for its sake these sacrifices of labor, of human life, and even of goodness may be made?